Good day, Internet. Chavez and Valko here, the key to your immigration solutions. I am Senior Associate Benjamin Hamilton. And as always, when you see me, we are here to talk about all things employment based immigration. We have an entire series on all of the different employment based residency categories and employment based visas. So if there's one you are interested in, go to our YouTube channel, check it out. We did a recent video about the first sort of part of applying steps in applying for a visa, which includes filling out a form DS-160 online, and then actually trying to schedule the visa appointment through one of the two different websites the Department of State uses. So obviously, if you're interested in that part of the visa application process, go look at that other video. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the actual visa interview itself, which I think is probably one of the most sort of nerve-wracking things that people have to deal with is preparing for that visa interview. So the first thing we really want to talk about is establishing the proper context of this interview. People make two sort of incorrect assumptions when they're going to a visa interview. The first is that, oh, this is going to be some like comprehensive review of all of your information, and they're going to interview you and ask you all of these questions because the officer is invested in your visa application. That is not the case. Even though the law actually kind of says that they're supposed to sort of review everything presented, base their decision on the totality of the circumstances, that is not the reality of the situation. Again, focus here is primarily going to be more on like sort of tourist and student visas because those are the ones that face the most denials. As opposed to work-based visas like an H or an L, those tend to be more straightforward, in part because you're already showing up with an approval from USCIS. Right? So that's like H's, L's, O's, R's. Anyway, in reality, most of these interviews last 2 to 3 minutes. That is it. And officers generally don't like having a bunch of paperwork shoved at them. They don't want to read a bunch of documents because it takes time and they don't have time. They want to get this done in 2 to 3 minutes. So the first assumption is about just timing, right? Most of the interview is going to be based on that first impression of you walking up to the window and then how you respond to their questions. That is what it is 90% of the interview. The second assumption is a lot of people, think, well, I am essentially innocent until proven guilty. Like the default is they should approve the visa unless there's some reason that they shouldn't. That is not the context of a visa interview. It is actually the opposite. The law basically says that you are guilty until proven innocent. So it is up to you to prove to the officer that you deserve the visa that you're applying for. So one of the most common mistakes people meet is they don't understand the concept of immigrant intent. What is this? Well, the law basically says that for most visas, you have to prove, right, that you do not have immigrant intent. Again, this is confusing. You're like, well, I'm applying for a visa. Aren't I an immigrant? Right. In U.S. immigration law, immigrant typically refers to somebody applying for residency. Someone applying for a tourist visa, student visa, any type of like temporary work visa is considered a non-immigrant, right? So again, if you're applying for a student visa or a tourist visa, you are a non-immigrant. So it's up to you to convince the officer that you have non-immigrant intent, meaning you only intend to temporarily go to the U.S. for a specific purpose, right? For tourism, study, for work, and then you're going to return. So again, you are guilty until proven innocent, and one of the main things that you're having to prove is involving your immigrant intent. Now, again, there are two visas where immigrant intent is absolutely positively not relevant. That is the H and that is the L, because it's written into the law, right? That you can show up to your interview and the officer could ask you, do you intend to apply for residency? And you can say, yes. The second I get to the United States on my H visa, the first thing I'm going to do is apply for residency. Guess what? It's okay. You can say that. You would never say that in a tourist visa interview or you will be denied. So again, important things are understanding that this is going to be a quick verbal interview and that you have to prove to the officer in that short period of time that you qualify for the interview. Now, the result of the interview we want always, of course, is an approval. But we have to talk about what are the other results of an interview. There's typically three, right? The worst result of an interview is what's called a 212A something, 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 right? If you see 212A, whatever it may be, that means the officer found you to be inadmissible to the United States. It's not even whether or not you really qualify for the visa. It's more that you don't qualify at all, period, to go to the United States. Why? Well, there's a bunch of different grounds. A lot of times when they cite 212, they give you a piece of paper that lists out like all the different reasons, and then they check the one that applies to you, right? That could be health, it could be criminal, it could be security, it could be public charge, right? It can also be previous immigration violations. So the most common reason to see 212 is criminal, or someone who entered illegally, was deported, overstayed, worked like some type of immigration violation. So that's why when it comes to 212, that's usually not a surprise, right? When someone's going to, like, if you show up to an interview and you're completely blindsided by 212, that's kind of rare, right? Because there has to be something there. Anyway, that's the worst case scenario, and it's usually not a surprise. Second one is 221G. So like, let's say you go look on your online status and it says refused 221G, and you're like, refused, I was denied. Well, no, right? When it says 221G, that's not actually a denial. What that means is administrative processing. It means that for whatever reason, the officer determined that they couldn't make a final decision in the moment, but they also didn't want to deny it. So there's some further processing that is needed. That can be background checks. That could be, like maybe there was a criminal issue and they want to verify that that was taken care of, or exactly what it was, right? It can be a number of different reasons. Unfortunately, one of the reasons we hate 221G is because we never know how long it's going to take, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Sometimes it can take a week. Sometimes it can take months and months and months. So again, 212, worst case scenario. 221G just means admin processing. Again, that's, we don't know how long it's going to take. And then the most common that you'll see is 214B. INA 214B means the officer denied your visa application. And it's not because you necessarily did anything wrong. Really what 214B is just saying is, for some reason, I don't think you qualify. Of course, you want to say, well, what's the reason? Well, they never actually tell you the reason because they don't have to. They can just cite 214B. Here's what 214B actually says. Every alien shall be presumed to be an immigrant. This is the guilty until proven innocent, shall be presumed to be an immigrant. Let's see, again, the law says it, until he establishes to the satisfaction of the consular officer at the time of application for a visa that he is entitled to a non-immigrant status, right? So a lot of people like see that and they think that the 214B relates specifically to their immigrant intent, to whether or not they overcame that bar. Not necessarily, right? It's just kind of a blanket denial. And the only way we can really kind of come to a reason why is talking to you after the interview. What did the officer ask? What did you say? To try to kind of piece out maybe what the exact reason for the denial was, right? But again, 214B is the most common grounds for denial. It is a blanket generalized denial. When you see that letter, you can't really read too much into that letter, right? Unless they somehow provided you with additional information. Every once in a while, you'll see that they like wrote something on it, like literally like just wrote in pen or something. Like they provided some additional information. It happens. I love it when they do that, because then again, if we're going to try to reapply, at least we know the issue we need to improve on or change. So again, coming back to you're guilty until proven innocent. This is going to be a quick interview, right? And likely results are approval, denial for inadmissibility, a delay for admin processing, or the most common denial, which is the 214B. I hate 214B, by the way. Sidebar, hate it, hate it, hate it. If I was president for a day and there was, little things I could do, one of them would be to remove 214B and say an officer cannot deny a visa application without providing a specific reason why. It doesn't have to be super detailed, right? I mean, they could potentially have a list, like they do for the inadmissibility, where they have a list and they check the 212 that applies. Like, why can't you just have a list and then just like check the boxes that apply? Right? So it doesn't take a lot of time for them to do. Anyway, digging into actual interview itself, right? So obviously, a lot of this, well, pretty much all of it is about the interview and that impression you are giving the officer. So you got to think about, from the moment you walk into the building, how am I presenting myself? Am I confident? Am I nervous? Am I dressed appropriately? Right? When I say dressed appropriately, I mean dressed appropriately for what you're applying for. Right? So you don't want to have, I mean, as a student, it's like, am I going to show up in a tux, or am I going to show up in like a tank top and shorts? Right? No, it's probably more in the middle. It's like probably business casual. But again, if you're like a banker and you wear a suit every day to work, then it's natural for you to show up in a suit, right? You really want to tailor your appearance to who you are and what you're applying for. I've seen plenty of people that like never wear a suit in their life. They want to get a suit for the interview and they show up with this like ill-fitting suit that just looks awkward and it just comes off weird, right? And that sets, a bad starting point for your interview. Second thing is, a lot of people, when they get up to the interview, is the window. The first thing they want to do is just shove a bunch of papers at the officer. Officers hate that. They rarely even look at paperwork. When it comes to paperwork, you usually want to have it very well organized. You want to know where everything is so that as you're speaking to the officer, you can cite to the paperwork, right? So if, for example, you can say, my employer authorized leave so that I could go visit my brother in the United States, right? So that's part of your conversation. And you can say, and by the way, I have here that letter if you want to see it, right? So that as you're speaking, you can reference stuff. And then if the officer says, well, yeah, I want to see it, bam, you can pull it out and show it to him. Again, you just shove a stack of paperwork at the officer. Officer instantly is just like, no. Again, they have 2 to 3 minutes. They don't have time for paperwork unless, again, through the conversation. So you want to have it there, but you want to just be able to cite to it and then present it as needed. So again, we're coming back to the most important thing is how you answer their questions. And here's the most common mistake. They say, what's the purpose of your trip? Tourism. Or what's the purpose of your trip? Study. You gave the officer nothing. How are they supposed to determine whether or not they believe you when you're giving them nothing? That's the most common mistake, is people get scared. You get timid, right? Now, on the reverse side, you can overshare, or you can come off as scripted, like you're just, you've prepared something and you're just like giving it. That's not. And sometimes officers will throw out random questions. It's like, hey, so what'd you have for breakfast this morning? Like, seriously. And it's not because they're trying to trick you. It's because they're trying to kind of loosen you up and make sure that you're really listening and giving them truthful answers. So a lot of times those aren't really trick questions, in the sense of they're trying to like get you to reveal something negative. It's more like they're trying to see if you're actually listening and giving sort of a genuine answer, as opposed to a scripted answer. So this is where it becomes really important that you understand that you have a short amount of time. So you need to get across the most important information. So if they say, what's the purpose of your trip? You say, well, actually, I'm applying for a student visa. I got my bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering here at this university, and I applied to a master's program at the university, at Texas A&M. And I got accepted into the master's program there, and so you're giving them that detail that helps them come to that quick decision. Because again, the more they have to dig, the more kind of frustrated they get. Because again, you're wasting their time, right? You don't want to overshare. You don't want to just talk and talk and talk and talk. And you see the officers getting kind of annoyed and frustrated and then has to kind of cut you off, right? But you want to come in prepared with, okay, what are the key facts for my case that I need to present, right? And so you're thinking of, studies from a student visa. Well, what studies have I done to date? Where am I going? Why did I choose that school? What about that school, that program? Maybe a little bit about what you plan to kind of do with that degree. And then another key one for like students is, how do you plan to pay for it? So they may ask, well, so what is it that most students don't have, they're young, they don't have a lot of money. So what does your family do? Business. Cool. You didn't help the officer at all with that answer, right? the officer's really kind of digging into like what's your sort of social standing and how you plan to pay for this. So the real answer is more like, oh, actually, my dad's an accountant and he has been for 20, 30 years. He works for this company. He's like, I don't know, a senior manager or a partner, and so actually my parents are paying for my education, or maybe like they're paying for part and then I got a loan for the other part. Right. So you're able to now the officer's like, okay, I can see that this person, has the means to pay for school, or if they've kind of figured out how to pay for it. And so it's like, what is that? I would say 2 to 3 sentence response I can give that's going to answer the question, the full question that they're kind of diving into. Again, they're asking about student visa, they're asking about family, like what do your parents do? Um, a lot of that has to do with how are you paying for school. So again, where people routinely kind of get in trouble is they don't give full answers. Again, maybe because you're scared, maybe just because you're naturally sort of introvert and timid. But this is where you really got to like work on, coming out and being able to give them that answer, because too often people get denied and they're like, well, the officer didn't even ask about this, or the officer didn't even look at this thing. And it's like, well, did you bring it up? Did you say it? Right? Because if you don't say it, don't expect them to follow up on it. They may or they may not. I mean, again, if you just say study, they may be like, well, where? University of Texas. What? Again, you can see the officer is going to get frustrated if they're having to kind of pull it out of you, and they may just kind of give up and be like, whatever, deny. They don't care. They're not invested in your case. They may interview 200 people today, 300 people today. So they're not, they just want to move you through. They don't care. Again, like same thing with like tourist visas. What's the purpose of your trip? Oh, I want to visit my brother. Okay. Like, no, it's more like, well, actually, my brother lives in the United States. He lives in Florida. I haven't seen him in years. And so he and his wife invited us to come and stay with them for a couple of weeks. Obviously I have the money, paid for the plane tickets, but obviously it comes to lodging. I'm staying with them, so we're not having to pay for anything. And since he lives in Florida, we're also going to go to like Disneyland and Universal and do some other things. And they're like, okay, like now you're giving them an idea of how long you're going to stay, what are you going to do, a little bit about how you're paying for this trip, right? And then they may ask, well, what do you do, right? Because again, now they're trying to test how you're going to pay for this, and also what are your ties to your home country, right? Well, actually, I have a job, I do X, Y, and Z, I make this amount of money, and I got 3 weeks off of work to go and visit my family, right? So again, it's just kind of dual edged on that specific question of actually answering multiple things, and how you paying for it and what are your ties to your home country. You can see how like I'm answering these questions in like I'm maximizing my answer, right? And getting as much information out in 3 to 4 um, sentences, right? Max, because again, you don't want to drone on, you don't want to overshare, right? But you want to make sure that you're checking all those boxes. Obviously, work related visas is a little bit more straightforward, right? It's really just key that you're familiar with the company and the exact details of the position offered, right? And sometimes you can get into trouble there just because, the company HR sends you an offer letter, right? And then, of course, the immigration attorney looked at that and had to tweak it a little bit to make it fit for the immigrant, right? And so you want to be really careful that you're not going off of the offer letter so much as you're going off of whatever was submitted to USCIS, right? What did that support letter say? And they're just testing to see, you know, does this look like you're actually going to do this job and it's a job that you understand, right? So they may, well, who's the company you're going to work for? What do they do? Well, what does the actual job entail? Like what are your day-to-day duties? Right? And just your ability to explain that succinctly, confidently, and also it matches with what they have, right? Because let's say you're applying for like an H-1B visa that was pre-approved by USCIS, but they're still going to give it a second look. And everything that was sent to USCIS gets uploaded to what's called the PIMS system, right? Which is what the State Department officer at the embassy can then access, meaning they can see the whole thing, right? They can see the support letter and the forms, and so they can double check all of that, right? As they're sitting there asking you questions. So if suddenly your answers are diverging from what they're seeing in the PIM system, you're going to run into problems. Where they may deny the visa and then refer the case back to USCIS for like they can't, the State Department can't like withdraw or like revoke the approval. They can deny the visa, but they can kick the approval back to USCIS and get USCIS to actually take a second look at it, reopen the case and look at it again. We've seen that happen. So what happens if I'm denied? Can I reapply? I know I hear all the time from people, the officer said I have to wait 6 months, blah, 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 blah. BS, right? There's no waiting periods. Now, there may be certain circumstances when it may be better to wait a little bit and not reapply right away, but there's no mandatory required waiting period. But the key thing you're going to have to address is this question. The officer is going to see that there was a previous denial, and their default position is going to be to follow that previous decision, right? So obviously you're in a more uphill battle than you were in your first application, but it doesn't mean you can't overcome it. And they're going to say, their question is going to be, what's changed? Obviously, if your answer is, well, nothing, then I don't even know if they're going to ask any questions at that point. They may just deny it, like right then and there. So you have to be prepared to address the question. Maybe something fundamentally has changed, and you can address that. Or maybe your answer is, well, when I talked to the officer, I forgot to describe. Maybe like, hey, actually, they didn't ask me about how I was paying for school, and then I didn't say anything about it, right? So that was kind of my mistake. So that information just wasn't presented last time, and actually, it turns out I had gotten a loan, and the office, we just never showed it, talked about it. And anyway, I have that here, and here's some other stuff I don't really think I presented the first time, right? And so you're not trying to just kind of throw the other person under the bus, the other officer, right? You're just trying to like, no, like there's some stuff. And that's a common scenario. I'm going to be honest, right, too, as someone who gets a lot of feedback from clients, but I also have a number of friends who are foreign service officers and getting their feedback. There are places in the world where their own internal data shows that on average, it takes multiple applications before they get approved. So it's not uncommon to see people have to apply 2 or 3 times before they can get a tourist visa. And to be honest, it is sometimes, based very much on luck, where, you get that officer who wants to move you through in 2 to 3 minutes, asks 1 or 2 questions and doesn't look at any documentation, bam, right? And then I've had a client go back and then get approved and say, well, what happened the second time? What was the secret sauce, the magic bullet? What did you say? More often than not, the response is nothing. The only difference was this officer really paid more attention to what I was saying, asked follow-up questions, and then when I presented them the documents, they actually looked at the documents. Like, they gave me a 5-minute interview instead of a 2-minute interview, and suddenly I'm approved. And unfortunately, that is so often the case, right? That it may be very, very well be that you didn't do anything wrong. I mean, sometimes people really feel like they were never given the full opportunity to present stuff. But that's just the name of the game. This is how it's done. They're going to claim we're underfunded, we're understaffed, but yet we still have so many people to see that we have no choice but to just move these people through in 2 minutes, right? Personally, I think you're not actually following what the law says in terms of how you're supposed to adjudicate cases if you're doing it that way. But that's how it's done, and we have to play by the rules. A couple other things to throw out there. Other things that can help or hurt. Obviously, if you have substantial amount of family living in the U.S., especially if they're residents or citizens, that's something you kind of have to overcome, right? Because they're going to see, well, all your ties are to the U.S. They're not to your home country. So that's one of those things that you're going to have to try to overcome and convince them that you will return, right? Maybe it's because you're married and your spouse is there, or your, obviously your job, or whatever the reason might be. That may be something um, you have to overcome. Something that's actually positive, that actually helps cases, is previous foreign travel, right? So if you're applying for a tourist visa and you've never before left your home country, right, that can be kind of a negative, right? That fits their sort of negative profile. Whereas if they see someone who has already traveled somewhat extensively outside of their home country, they're like, okay, this person seems to have a history that shows that they have the wherewithal to travel and that they obey the laws. Something I want to actually circle back to really quickly is profiling. The State Department profiles, period. They do it. They profile people. Meaning they're looking at your DS-160 and they're looking at you, and it may very well be that by the time you get to the window, there's already a decision formed in their mind. I think that's wrong. I've been a victim of it myself, not directly, because obviously if a guy showed up looking like me, unfortunately, I'm going to get approved. That's the name of the game. On the other hand, my mother-in-law is short. She's of a humble background. She's very dark-skinned, being actually she's from South America and actually has a lot of Native American blood. And unfortunately, that means her application, because of how she looks and the profile she fits, is going to be inherently more difficult and have a higher probability of denial, regardless of the facts, right? And that just means if you are that, as opposed to the South American of European descent, who's taller, who's lighter skinned, right, who looks more European, they're going to have an easier time. That's wrong, but that is the truth. That means you kind of have to look at those factors in terms of, how do I look? How do I present myself? What is that officer's impression of me going to be as I'm walking up to the window? And then being prepared to address that, right? Obviously, in my mother-in-law's case, they're saying, "What's the purpose of your trip?" She's trying to communicate as, I'm going to go see my daughter and son-in-law that live in the United States. I haven't seen them for years. Actually, my son-in-law is an attorney, an immigration attorney. They're paying for my trip. I'm going to go for 2 to 3 weeks, right, to visit them. Obviously, my husband is here, my house is here, my job is here, my other kids, my grandkids, they're all here in my home country. You're trying to get as much as that out, right? Because specifically based on her profile, if she is not, taking the initiative to really answer those questions, they're going to profile her right into a denial. Like right into a denial, no benefit of the doubt. And we see this happen routinely in posts, right? So again, that's up to you to, take advantage of the questions they do ask you to get out that key information. And if you have paperwork, don't shove it in their face, but reference it, right? Oh, my son-in-law and daughter, he's an attorney. They invited me. They're paying for everything. By the way, I have a copy of their tax returns. W-2. I have a letter from them, saying that I'm going to stay with them. They're going to pay for everything, and that they're going to make sure, obviously I come back. If you want, I can show you the letter. I can show you the financials. Again, the officer may or may not decide to look at it, but at least you had it ready to go and you offered it up. So when you really look at what are the main takeaways from this, is when you come to an attorney, when it comes to like a tourist or a student visa interview, and you say, well, what's the best thing that we can help you with? I want to be straightforward with you. I can prepare this beautiful application full of documentation, right? At the end of the day, they're probably not going to look at it. So when you say, well, when it comes to those type, like a tourist visa or a student visa, the main service that we can provide you is really sitting down, figuring out what your exact situation is, and trying to help coach you through the interview, right? To try to coach you sort of what are the questions, what are the what are you kind of, how are you looking to respond, right? Is really preparing you for that verbal portion of the interview, because that is, right, again, I've sent plenty of clients in with these great packets that were documented and tabulated, that had everything, that documented everything. Officers refuse to look at it. And that's too often the case. So again, if you're worried and you want sort of our help, I would say that for a lot of that type of stuff, specifically when it comes to visa applications, is looking over your DS-160, right? And then helping sort of prep you for that interview are really kind of the main things we can help do. And again, just remember, take the initiative. If they give you that question, no one word answers, right? Squeeze in 3 to 4 sentences, as much as you can get in that time period. But look, as always, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us on all the different socials, whether it be YouTube, Facebook, you name it. You can go to our website, schedule a consultation. I mean, look, if the only reason you're scheduling a consultation is just because I have a tourist visa interview and I just want to talk to you for a half hour about my interview, it'll probably be worth your while, right? Just to help with a sort of like interview prep. If that's all you do, you don't even hire us to really do anything. You just want to do the consultation for like an interview prep. Great. We'll do that. That's probably the most effective use of our time and your money in that specific context. Obviously, if you're like applying for like an H-1B visa, then you need to hire an attorney to help you with the full process and all the forms and the because there the forms and documentation don't matter. But I'm increasingly or always or routinely frustrated by how the Department of State treats clients. I don't think it's fair. But I also understand that with limited time, limited resources, a lot of times they don't really have any other option but to be so brief and so quick. And we just have to understand it. We just have to play by their rules, play their game. But hey, as always, any questions, concerns, let us know. Download our app, Lawpilot Guardian. You can find it for Android or iOS, right? Again, go to our website. Obviously, you hear me talking always about employment-based immigration, but know that we are the key to your immigration solutions. We have people here that do great attorneys that do litigation, that do deportation, that do family. So whatever it is, U.S. immigration related, we can, we have someone here that can help. But otherwise, ask your questions. We'll see if we can answer. But until then, thank you for tuning in to this video. I hope it was helpful, and then stay tuned for whatever our next video may be. Thank you.